Hey everybody, welcome to the RevGEN Reply. In this episode, we're going to talk about going independent. So this is a good topic right now because with COVID going on, there's probably a lot of hotels that are considering going independent or think maybe they can try it on their own. So we're going to start with a couple different topics that we think are kind of like hot button issues right now. And the first one is, what are the reasons for going independent? So we're just going to list a couple of different reasons. If you have your own reasons that we don't cover here, feel free to add them in the comments below. But I'll turn it over to you guys. What do you think are the big reasons to go independent right now during COVID-19?
Not necessarily during COVID-19. I think the first obvious reason is you don't have a choice. You lose your flag.
Yes.
You aren't in compliance for whatever reason, fail too many QAs. Unfortunately, that does happen. So you might get what we call deflagged by the brand and stripped of your brand affiliation. That's not really probably what we're talking about here. I think we're talking more about like reasons that you'd want to go independent just because you have a choice to, and it's going to be better for your business. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think the number one factor, unless you're being forced to go independent, that you should look at is brand contribution. So, and in my opinion, brand contribution is defined by everything that's driven to the brand website or the brand voice channel. The brands themselves will argue that their contribution is essentially anything that's going through their central reservation system, and they'll even take credit for their OTAs, but everybody knows that's just their way of boosting their brand contribution. So I think especially with COVID going on, like the number one factor, in my opinion, of brand contribution has always been like corporate loyalty. You know, big Fortune 500 companies telling their employees you have to stay at XYZ hotel. Through COVID-19, all that business has kind of fallen out. Mm-hmm. So we're really seeing like a flattening of brands and kind of going back to the Stone Age where everyone's on an equal playing field, and it's really all about like marketing and price and location. And
I feel like leisure travelers, which are kind of the majority of travelers right now, aren't all of those. The brands will say they're brand loyal. I mean, most people are members of every program,
yeah,
so
like
you're not going to win.
Which card does this hotel belong to?
Which credit card, which members code am I going to use today? So it doesn't. That's not really a big factor here, and but it does play into the whole COVID-19 go independent discussion.
Yeah, I would also argue that a lot of times location trumps brand, which is why pre-COVID, you would see a lot of independent hotels in high barrier to entry urban markets. So like there's tons of independents in New York City, really in any major metro, or you see a lot of independents in like very specific niche leisure destinations like beach destinations, or, you know, in a certain highway location where it doesn't matter what flag you are, if people need to stop, they're going to stop there. So I think those are the spots that you're going to see, even post-COVID, the real drive behind independent hotels are locations like that.
And I think just finally, like, aside from brand contribution, brand fees are kind of out of control right now. We've talked about that on other videos. So if you're just really not seeing the return on investment by having a brand associated with your hotel, that's, I think, a big driver in going independent. There are obviously huge costs associated with going independent, but sometimes that does outweigh the benefit by losing all those franchise fees and other hidden fees that they're starting to stick in there. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out after COVID, when the brands kind of start to regain some power. I think right now brands aren't really in a super powerful position, but as they're coming out of the recovery, I think it's going to be interesting to see like how lenient they are with their hotels. So yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, part two, this would be after you've already decided to go independent. So let's say you have decided that it's worth it. You've done the cost benefit analysis, or you just think it's time to take the plunge. So the next section is, what should you do if you've decided to go independent? So I'll start off. If you've decided to take that plunge, you kind of need to get your ducks in a row, and there's a lot of organization that you have to do before you go independent. Because with most of these properties that go independent, there's this kind of weird phase in between where you get deflagged or you lose your brand, and then you are fully up and running. And that, if you're really on point, that may be a couple of weeks. If things are kind of more disorganized, it may be a couple of months. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do to make that transition go more smoothly. So just a couple things that come to mind is once you've made that decision to go independent, you pretty much need to start compiling all of the information that you can that's not strictly proprietary to your brand. So, if you're going to switch PMSs, you should probably be getting into your PMS and pulling as much data as you can, both historical, forward-looking, rate plans, rate mapping, rate coding, rate categories, all of that good stuff, just so you have as much data as you can possibly bring over to your new tech stack. Also, too, I would say, start rebuilding your relationship with your market managers, your OTA market managers, and things like that, and then really start shopping around for a good tech solution. So I'll turn it over to Bill and Laura to talk more about like the technical details, but there's a lot of things to think about. So CRS, channel manager, PMS, RMS. You guys want to touch on some of those?
Yeah.
Let's tackle PMS first, I guess.
Okay.
And I'm not necessarily going to say like which ones you should go, but talking more about the things you need to consider. So I think there's tons of PMSs out there, and we get asked this question all the time, like which one should I choose? And there's pros and cons of all of them. I don't think there's any one like golden PMS out there. So I think the first thing you need to consider is like, are you a full service hotel or are you a limited service hotel? Those are huge differentiators into like which PMS type is going to work for you. So you could already kind of narrow it down and split the field by doing that. I think the other thing that you're going to want to look for is obviously everything should be cloud-based now, and it should be 100% in the cloud. So one thing that trips up a lot of owners that don't necessarily know is they'll say it's a cloud-based solution, and really all they're doing is installing the PMS on a remote server. That is not truly cloud-based. Cloud-based means you're accessing it via the web. You can access it from anywhere, securely. And that is just going to make sure you have like a more tech-forward, SaaS-based PMS. With that should come lower implementation fees and even ongoing fees, because it's much more scalable if they're just powering it that way. So I would definitely push either way, go for a cloud-based system.
Yeah, I think also things to consider when picking a PMS or really anything within your tech stack is like how much data can you get out of the system. Obviously, we're a very data-centric company, so you can't really make any good decisions if you don't have good data. So if your system is locked down and it really doesn't provide you any insights, that's not a sign of a good system. Support too. Are they based in the U.S.? Are they based in whatever country you're in? If you know that they're going to be in a totally different country, you might not get the best support. So that's something to think about too.
A lot of the, like back to the data thing, you're going to want, PMS is just one part of your tech stack. There's a lot of stuff you need to add on to it. So you want to ask them about integration capabilities and also how open they are to that. So like the most forward-thinking PMS companies out there have gone like full-blown open API, which means, essentially very low costs to integrate, with CRSs, channel managers, RMSs, booking engines, all that good stuff. The ones that are a little more old school are going to come with like very clunky integrations, high fees, and I think that's going to slow you down to getting on all your channels and getting anything else. And there's so many cool things out there that you could bring to your hotel, and you just want to make sure your PMS, which is kind of the central hub, has the ability to play with those things if you want to.
So what about we're always asking about like, do I need a CRS? Do I need a booking engine, a channel manager, plus a PM? Like that's one thing that we get asked a lot. So do you want to kind of touch on that a little bit?
So I would say like after you figure out your PMS, the next most important thing in my opinion is a channel manager. That's going to get you at least connected to the OTA, so you have some sort of lifeline, to get some bookings from an e-commerce standpoint. And another thing to ask your PMS is a lot of these companies are trying to bundle a package, which has its pros and cons. I think the more bundled it is, the simpler the solution, but that also means a lot more technology for that company to tackle. So, they may be like spreading themselves too thin. So you could either look at it like the pro is I can work with one player and get a complete solution, or should I,
the best solution.
or is it the best? Should I be just finding niche players that do things really well that play with each other? So what we typically recommend is like we find PMSs and channel managers that just have a really strong relationship. They're different companies, but they have a really strong relationship and they work together. And a lot of times, like the implementation is almost the same team, whether it's not behind the scenes. But importance of a channel manager, I think the most important thing is probably like costs. Like figure out, is it a flat monthly fee, which is super nice, super cost effective, or are they charging you per reservation? Right, you're gonna have to do all the math on that. And usually the largest cost is connecting to the GDS. So you definitely want to ask about that. Like I've seen, per reservation fees as high as like $15 per reservation. So those are the types of questions you want to ask there.
Yeah. And I've heard of companies also that will have a separate GDS fee. Like they'll have their own standalone fee and then a separate kind of like hidden, I didn't realize you wanted to connect to the GDS. Well, that's going to be an extra this. So that's something you want to figure out in your initial discussions because that's going to make a big difference.
Right.
What about RMS? Do you want to touch on RMS at all?
Sure, yeah. RMS is, I think it's one of those things where, you got to ask yourself, is it worth it necessarily to go with like a full...
What's an RMS, first of all?
Okay, well, first of all, RMS would be a revenue management system. So I think what you may find especially if you're a smaller independent hotel and you go out there and start shopping around for RMSs, I think the first thing that you'll notice is a lot of them are truly overkill for maybe what you're looking to do. So, if you're a 40 room, 50 room, 60 room, 70 room property that's gone independent, you may not need an RMS that is, like turbocharged, super crazy, all the bells and whistles. May just not be necessary. At this point, if you're able to get like a good reporting solution and a good PMS and CRS, in a lot of ways you can handle a lot of like the day-to-day rate changes and things like that on your own. You don't necessarily need to have an automated RMS system for, just one of these small independent properties.
And that's going to be a tool that, can make rate decisions for you. So you're not having to be in the system. That's kind of what Daniel was inferring.
Yeah, exactly. And I find with independent properties, like there's actually so much more that you can do just with the initial PMS setup and general data cleanliness you can just do it all in-house. You don't necessarily have to have the super powerful RMS sitting on top of it. Because whenever I look at a lot of independent properties, I'll hop into the PMS and realize like, okay, things aren't necessarily clean in here. The transition from brand to independent wasn't super clean. So there's a lot of just general cleanup that you can do within the PMS, and you can just handle it all right there in the PMS.
Yeah. Another thing to consider with an RMS too is it's not totally hands off. So you might say, I'm going to spend all this money and I'm just going to have it do all my rates and management for me.
Yeah.
That's not the way it works. You still do need, at least in this day and age, you still need a human being in there, tinkering with it and making changes and adding events and things like that. It's not totally, like AI, if you want to call it that.
Post-COVID, like all the algorithms have gone out the window anyways.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Bottom line, like RMS is great. It's not essential, within like the first 30, 60 days.
Mm-hmm.
Most important thing is getting you connected to all the channels and getting visible again.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah.
And I think, have we talked about everything except for kind of like the booking engine and things?
One question we get a lot is channel manager versus a central reservation system. So these lines are extremely blurred, and even internally when we were talking before this video, we had some disagreements. But in my mind, right, a channel manager is just that. It's connecting you from the PMS to all of your OTAs, to your GDS, maybe to your brand website. A central reservation system, like the main difference in my opinion, is it is literally a place where you can go and make reservations centrally. So a lot of times it does include channel management functionality, and a lot of times it also includes things like a voice channel. So if you're a small hotel, I don't really think a central reservation system is necessary as long as you have a good channel manager, because you should be able to take reservations at your property level. If you're a big brand or even a small brand, or if somehow you want to consolidate your voice channel, that's why you would go with a CRS, so that somebody could actually, for like multi-brand, punch in a reservation to the CRS, which then flows to the PMS. But I think for the general audience, like most people who are considering going independent, just focus on getting a good channel manager, and I don't really necessarily think like a CRS is necessary.
And if there are like truly any experts on this topic, I think we know what we're talking about, but if you want to chime in the comments, please do, and just give your thoughts on what you think is necessary for like the back-end tech stack.
Yeah, let us know if we're totally missing the point on a CRS.
I don't think we are. So yeah, I think kind of the last and sort of most obvious thing that you're going to need when you lose your brand is that, online presence, right? You are partially signed up with a brand because you're going to be listed on a site like Hilton.com, Wyndham.com, brand.com as we call it here. So you're definitely going to need a new vanity site, a new website. And with that, obviously a website is just a standalone website. You will need a booking engine that can connect to your PMS via a channel manager or something like that. So that's another piece of the pie that you need to consider. So there's a lot more at play than just setting up a website and getting a booking engine. One of the biggest things that you also need to consider is the ability to showcase your hotels on Google, TripAdvisor, Kayak, what we call meta. So that's adds a little bit more complexity to everything. Some of the channel managers that we talked about do provide access to display your live rates on Google, and obviously as Google becomes a much more influential player in the booking process, that's something you can't ignore. So if you're going independent and you're not thinking about how you'll be displayed on Meta, I think that you're really missing out, because all those reservations that people are booking through Google are then going to end up being filtered through the OTAs, where you, as an independent, now you won't be grandfathered into those sweet OTA commission deals that the brands have. You're going to probably be paying somewhere closer to 15, 18, 20%, even more. So that's going to be a big piece of your margins if you are letting all those reservations go to the OTAs. So definitely consider not just getting a vanity site, your new brand.com, but also your booking engine, and then how are you going to connect that to the meta channels? Certainly something that you should not overlook. And
so who connects to these meta?
There's a lot of different players. If you Google hotel ads is what is the way to connect to Meta, at least for Google. And then a lot of those same players also connect to the other Meta channels like TripAdvisor, Kayak, Trivago. Those are basically the big four Meta. And that's not Google Ads, formerly AdWords. That's Google Hotel Ads. I know it sounds similar. It's very confusing, but that's where your rates are going to be listed under your Google My Business listing. So that's something I'm talking about with people all the time. So if you guys ever have any questions on that, please reach out to us, because it's a very confusing but potentially very lucrative space to start investing in.
Yeah, and then I guess last but certainly not least is, if you lose a brand, you lose a lot of marketing and digital support. So right, you might look at your franchise fees and say oh wow, this is a sweet deal, I'm going to save so much money. A lot of that money needs to be reinvested into third-party support to really get your hotel off the ground. So could be revenue management, could be sales, and then digital.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things from a digital perspective?
There's so many ways to invest in digital. Social media, first of all, that's like a big component, but that's just a very small piece of the pie. And not only can you have a social media presence, but you can also invest in social media. So it's not just posting Facebook posts and on Instagram and things like that. You can boost posts, you can just invest in more social media marketing. So that's one part of it. You can run AdWords or Google Ads to get your listing to the top of the page. You can run TripAdvisor sponsored listings. You can do all sorts of, obviously Meta, which is what I touched on before, spending more on your Meta campaigns. There's display ads, things that, they'll save your cookies and it'll display your hotel to someone that's previously been searching on your site. And yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to spend money online, but that's really what we kind of see as like the future of marketing. It's really, you're not, buying print ads and, things for the local football stadium anymore. It's more about where you're going to spend your money online. So another thing that we can help out with.
Yeah. So this sounds like a lot because
it is a lot.
It is. So it's certainly not an easy task. But if you have the right reasons for going independent, it can be a smart move. And once you iron out a lot of the setup, I think things move pretty smoothly. And the nice thing about it is like there are so many innovative hospitality companies out there that you used to have to rely on your brands. You can build a really cool tech stack that lets your hotel do a lot of forward thinking things, and there's also plenty of services and consultants that are more than happy to help your hotel. So don't be afraid of it. It's certainly something that's very feasible. You just have to crunch the numbers and make sure it's right for you.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that is a wrap for this episode. If we missed anything, or if you have any other input or comments or anything that we missed, just put it in the comments below and we'll be sure to respond. Thanks for watching.